Thank you for attending the 2020 Sunstone Digital Symposium Session 192, titled The Return of Elder Pingree, Memoir of a Departed Mormon. The audio for this session will be available for purchase at sunstone.org after the symposium. The video recording of this session will be available in the Whova app for approximately 3 months, beginning at the end of August 2020. At Sunstone, we're making it a goal to build a community that always allows many ways for people to express their faith. In fact, our tagline is more than one way to Mormon. So we invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. The Return of Elder Pingree is a feature-length documentary film that follows lapsed Mormon Geoff Pingree as he retraces the steps he took 25 years earlier in Guatemala as a devout missionary, Elder Pingree. He seeks to discover what has become of the Guatemalans who once trusted him with their religious faith, attempts to understand the violent political conditions he was ignorant of as a missionary, and grapples with the basic human question of how one might do good in the world. Geoff Pingree is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, writer, photographer, and professor of cinema studies at Oberlin College. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn the time over to Geoff Pingree. If you want to come on with your audio and video, Geoff. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks.
I feel like I just spent the last 80 minutes watching you go through forests and jungles, and it was quite a pleasure.
More suffering.
This was actually, I'm really glad that this was a part of the symposium this year, partially because you've told a story that is part of a lot of people's stories who come to the symposium. You've told many of these people's stories. In fact, about 5 years ago, in the magazine, Sunstone magazine published a personal essay by Kenny Kemp called The Returning Missionary, Only a Dream, which kind of follows exactly the same path you did, except it was after 40 years, if you can imagine that. And he went back to a Central American country, reconnected with all of his converts, and was kind of on the same path you were. I'd encourage you to go read it. I think you'll really resonate with it.
I'm surprised I haven't read it before, actually. I will go read that.
Oh, yeah, it's really interesting. I really enjoyed it. And the other reason I was really glad to see it was because, of course, Sunstone has a deep connection to the Pingree family through Toby, who was a tremendous part of the board. He was kind of the guy who saved Sunstone. He was the guy who moved us over to being an education foundation, which allowed us to survive. So props to Toby.
I think he's watching right now if he's still awake.
Oh, I love Toby. I'm so glad I could say that. I said that before I knew you were going to be on here, Toby. You're the bomb. I will not forget you. And thanks for making this guy over here too, this Geoff guy. So anyway, do you have anything that you want to say before we start taking questions?
I mean, it's a pleasure to show it at Sunstone. I'm really glad that I could, and it's really the first time that it's been presented to a significant Mormon audience, and that's kind of interesting because it has been screened for a lot of other audiences. So I'm very curious to see what people have to say. I will just say this one thing. A few days ago, I was having a discussion and a different question and answer about the film, and at the end of the conversation, I found myself sort of saying this was a kind of a journey out of shame, and I've been thinking about that. And my brother pointed that out and said he thought that was true. So I just put that out there as maybe a point of provocation. I don't know.
This is the story of a journey out of shame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's really one way. Yeah.
Let's see if people do something with that, and if they don't, we'll come back and we'll probe you a little bit more.
All right.
All right. Looks like one of the first questions Somebody said, "Wow, that was so well done and thought-provoking." I wondered as I watched whether you found it harder to tell families and friends at home about your disaffection or in Guatemala.
It's a really good question. Well, family at home and friends at home, it happens much more gradually. So, and in Guatemala, it was as you saw what happened. So it was fairly immediate. It was kind of abrupt and all compressed. And so the one thing about returning to Guatemala is that reunion and revelation were the same experience. That made it pretty complicated, I think, for me and probably for them as well. With my own family, it happened pretty gradually. Over a several year period. And so, and my immediate family has been very supportive. I think it would be disingenuous to say that it was a comfortable situation when that was happening, but they were still very supportive. So I guess they were really just very different experiences. And in some ways, the experience with the Guatemalans was more, I suppose, difficult to process, in part because it happened so many times over and over. The film only shows a few of the exchanges.
Oh.
There were more, yeah, and they followed a pretty similar pattern. When I was doing the film, I was down in Guatemala for a month, and after the first week or so, I started to just realize how depressed I was getting up every morning to go out and shoot, because I knew I was going to see another person. I was going to disappoint them, and I don't know why I hadn't anticipated that would be the case, but it certainly was the case when I was there. So it was a burden. I mean, it was hard. It was hard.
That's interesting, because something continued to motivate you to go out and connect with those people. What
Yeah.
was that motivation?
I suppose, at a certain point, years after my mission, I mean, for many years, I never looked at my journals or my photographs. They were 35 millimeter slides, or read my letters, or even listened to those tapes. And I pretty much had done a perfect job of building a collection if you wanted to ever make a film about your mission. So it wasn't really so much that I wrestled with the theological ideas so much as the friendships I had with those people, the relationships. And I just thought a lot about what they meant and if they would change. And there's a part of me that thought, well, don't disturb them. And I think some people who see the film say, why did you disturb those people? Why did you have to do that? But I kind of felt that I owed it to them in a way, that to be honest about who I was and am, and so they could sort of respond in kind. I wasn't trying to challenge them, and I wasn't really sure what I would find. They weren't, no one had email, no one had a cell phone, none of the people that I knew. And so I had to go down there cold. I couldn't prepare for the shoot like I would at other films. And so I was worried we'd go down there and, I took a crew of 6 for a month, and I was worried we'd find nobody. And it was astonishing how many people we found in the very same place that I last saw them. So I guess what motivated me was a very personal thing. And I suppose I was hoping I could find some kind of common ground. At the level of sort of ideas, I'm not sure I did, because I'm pretty sure most of them believe I'm coming back, or hope that I will, and see it in a pretty straightforward, I am or I'm not sort of way. And for me, it was obviously more complicated than that. But the warmth and the friendship, and I think for me, I experienced it most in the physical touch. It was about physical things. And you see it with Doña Melly when she's got her hand on my arm, and she's telling me, what she would do if I told her that I was leaving the church as her son. So I think that was a really complicated and paradoxical experience for them and for me, but yeah.
One of the things I seemed to notice was that the relationship between you and the converts seemed to survive.
Yeah.
Would you say that they survived? They seem to still love you. You seem to still love them, the way you portrayed them.
I think that's true. And I think I mean, there's a reason why the part that comes later in the film kind of serves as an emotional climax for the film, where the people I'm sitting with say, well, what you did when you do something, if you do it with a good heart, basically, it matters, regardless of what happens next or later. And I think that's true. I was talking again with my brother, the one who appears in the film in audio, and he said, even friends of ours who've left the church, I've never met someone who regretted going on their mission. And that's true. There's never been even a thought of regret. There's some experiences with the institutional church that I wasn't happy about, but regretting the mission, no. And I think that's largely because of what I learned about human beings, and that is mostly because of my relationships with those people. So, and which was really a way of learning about myself, ultimately.
So you learned about people, you learned how to be human. That sounds like it's what you're saying.
I guess
even though you were acting like a representative the entire time. Sounds kind of paradoxical.
I mean, I never saw myself as certainly not as an Orthodox missionary, and really not as one that was very good at following the system. I never felt that comfortable, and I was always trying new ways of thinking and new ideas and new stuff. I mean, I mentioned in the film with Carlos Amado, he was just very supportive and friendly, and whatever I was doing, he thought was fine. I mean, he was really supportive, and that meant a lot to me. I mean, I still have a lot of love for him, and he for me, and that's an important relationship, even though we're obviously living in sort of in different paths. What you said about I sort of learned to be human. I guess I'm, in a broad sense, that's probably an interesting way of thinking about it, because to kind of embrace your complexity and embrace all the different contradictory things you feel, rather than experience them as problems or defects, which is really kind of where I go with that shame comment, which is to stop feeling bad about myself for what I feel inside, or what doesn't line up with what I've been taught, or what's being told to me in the church. So I think that's probably a fair way to put it.
So did anyone just want, or were they more concerned with you coming the missionary work?
I lost the first part of your question. Did anyone want me to, and I lost that, rather than just say once more, please?
Yeah, no worries. So did anyone just want to listen to you while you were out there with them, or were they more concerned with making you come back? Was it like a reverse missionary work? They were working on you this time instead of you on them?
Well, the conversation with Elvin Moreira, the guy where we were sitting in kind of a hotel up in chairs next to each other, I probably had the longest conversation with him, and he really did want to listen to me. That conversation was the most like a genuine exchange of all of them.
I felt that.
He really listened to a lot about my life, and I listened to a lot about his life. And it's not that the others didn't want to listen. It's, it's kind of a wavelength thing. And I think to a degree that I was uncomfortable, even as a missionary, but certainly later, they really did put me in a heroic position in their stories. And so I think, what I felt, and probably what was the sort of exerting this pressure, was their sense that this is where I needed to be in this narrative. And I had slipped out of it. And, they kind of saw me through that. And so it made sense to them, I think, to really want to pull me back into that narrative, because everything kind of held together. I have no idea what this meant to them after I left. I've had some correspondence, but I don't really know kind of how they've thought about it since. I'd actually be interested, and I'm hoping to go back with the film, and that might be a pretty interesting experience as well. But I think for them, it's largely because of just the way they frame their experience. And I think that their encounters with me 25 years previous marked a kind of before and after for them of how they viewed their lives. And so that's an awful lot of existential weight and just emotional order, I think, that's leaning in one direction.
That's for sure. Yeah, actually, one of our respondents here said that the film seems to have a somber tone, and almost wonders if it feeds into the narrative that those who leave the church are not always happy. How would I don't know? How do you respond to that? Are you happy? I'm not asking you that question for reals. How do you respond to that? Is it a somber movie?
When I showed it to my family, about a year ago, when I was just finishing, kind of getting to the last cut, I showed it to my parents and 5 siblings, and 2 of my brothers. My one older brother is, in my view, the only true believer in our family, and he and then one of my other brothers both said, did you want to show any of the fun things that happened in the mission? They thought it was too somber, and I actually made some changes. My intention wasn't to make it somber, but I guess the journey for me has been a pretty somber one, because making the film and kind of coming to terms with my relationship to my beliefs and to the church as my kind of like formative heritage and culture, which is always a part of me, those things weren't light experiences. There's no really getting around that. And so I imagine as time passes, I will look back on this film and think, wow, it's really heavy. I hope that's what I do. But I'm not sure I could have made it any other way. I think I made multiple versions of this film as I went through, multiple cuts. Sometimes some of the cuts had no voiceover. And in the end, it had to have voiceover, is what I decided. The only way it really made sense to me. And I think the voiceover kind of pushed it in the more somber direction, because I'm sort of narrating my own experience. And I guess my view of my own experience as a missionary working through that stuff is just it's at least not yet, it's not a comedy. It still plays a little bit more. I'm not sure I call it a tragedy, but it is a more somber story. And I'm not sure what to say, except that I think that's just how I experienced it. Yeah.
There were 3 names that I saw in the end credits. I'm one of those credit readers. One of the special thanks, it was Wayne Booth, Eugene England, and Bill Bradshaw. Yeah. All 3 of whom, so Wayne Booth was a professor of rhetoric at University of Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. And Eugene England was a professor of literature at BYU, and Bill Bradshaw was a professor of biology. And it's really interesting that you brought them up, 1, because they have such a deep connection to Sunstone, and 2, I was really interested. Which one of those guys would you say affected this film the most?
Ooh. Well, Gene was a friend, close friend of my dad's, and so when I was at BYU, he was a real mentor. Mm-hmm. We were very close, and I think about him a lot, actually. I mean, my quickest answer would be to say Gene. I'd add Wayne, who ended up being my dissertation advisor in graduate school, because he was in a similar position to me, having sort of not being in the church anymore, but having a very kind of warm relationship with it. And I'd say what he added to what I already was thinking, which was much more deeply shaped by Gene, would sort of make sense. Bill Bradshaw, in some ways, I felt like I was more of a friend with Bill than he was a mentor as well, but in a less vertical way, which is, I think, to his credit. I'm paying him a compliment. But all 3 had an enormous and enormously positive impact on me, and in the way that I think, mostly about sort of thinking critically. I guess if any of those had made this film, it would be a lot more lighthearted. Because I think of all of them, and I think of these kinds of conversations I would have with them, and they were, for the most part, I mean, Gene's response to a lot of the things that I said that were most difficult for me to sort of figure out, when he would laugh. And sometimes that pissed me off, and sometimes it didn't. But I remember that his laughter was pretty interesting and inclusive.
It's true. I was actually his administrative assistant during the last year of his life at UVU. And he didn't laugh as much then. He'd gone through a lot of very difficult things. But at the same time, I can totally understand how he would have been a huge impact on you. And I could feel some of that, because what I felt you doing in that movie was trying to strike a balance, you were trying to take both your experience and the experiences of your converts seriously and see what happened when they both spoke with each other. I didn't feel you being dismissive of any of these people, and I didn't feel you being dismissive to your younger self either, which feels very healthy to me. And it brought up one more question in my mind. You were such a successful missionary, but you portray yourself as being kind of a doubter the entire time. And I'm curious as to what motivated you. Was there no spiritual motivation in there at all? Did you draw your motivation from another source?
Well, you know, I think I touch on some of it in what I'm saying in the film, but it would not be true for me to say that there is no spiritual dimension to my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the language and the formula for spirituality that I learned growing up never really worked for me. And so it was really kind of a matter of fitting in what felt like for me, a pretty complicated story that I was living in an environment that just did not really nurture that story. And so you hear me a couple of times say, you know, the church meant something kind of different to me in Guatemala. And that's because it was more about emotional engagement with the people and much less about theological questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you know, since you mentioned Gene England, I'll just say, you know, one of the more memorable conversations I ever had with him was in London. And my brother and I and my sister, we were all part of the study abroad with him. Greg and I were his teaching assistants, and I was talking to him about attending church or not, or believing it was really the most basic conversation about the church. And he said something to me that was very meaningful and liberating. And he said, you know, it may be that you just not being in the church is where you should be. You shouldn't be in the church. That might be the right thing for you. And no one had really said that to me from a position. I didn't look at Gene as an ecclesiastical leader for me, because he never was mine. But to hear someone of a different generation who was a respected leader for many in Mormonism was interesting when he said that. I realized it just it kind of changed the horizon a little bit for me. And I'm grateful to him for that. And I don't think, you know, I know his family very well, and in saying that, I'm not in any. I hope that doesn't come across as, you know, he's sort of like Gene England has something to do with me leaving the church, because he certainly did not. If anything, Gene makes me, you know, like my own dad, or it makes me think that, you know, there's a lot that's really good about Mormonism and people who are practicing Mormons, people who live like that. They're the most devoted Mormons I've ever known. So he had nothing to do with me leaving the church. He probably had a lot to do with me feeling better about myself, though.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, he was really a stabilizing influence for me when I was going through my questioning and such like that. I couldn't have done it without him. So we see you go through this journey, and we often have this session at Sunstone called the Pillars of My Faith, where people who have been, you know, with Mormon studies for a long time talk about what the basics of their current spirituality is. So how would you define and practice spirituality in your life now?
It's interesting, you know, after literally decades, I started praying recently again, and that will probably surprise my parents.
You heard it here first, folks.
But it's a very different kind of prayer, and the way it's functioning is it's much more. It organizes my focus and my feelings, which again, I can't speak for how anyone else prays and what it means to them or why they do it. But for me, it's actually much more part of almost a meditation. I guess I would say I'm certainly not an atheist, because that's a kind of position of certainty that I'm not comfortable taking. I don't really know what's beyond this life. I certainly hope that some of the things that, Mormons believe hold, if only because otherwise I'm not going to, see my parents much longer. That truly makes me sad. But if you ask me what I would bet on, I mean, I believe in science, and I really don't know. So spiritually, do I believe in God? I guess I think I probably do believe in some kind of higher power, but I don't believe in my ability to assert something beyond that, because I think whatever that may be is certainly well beyond my comprehension, and not only beyond my comprehension, but I don't think that I don't feel the need to try and make it more particular than that. I guess one of the things that was most revelatory for me after I had stopped going to church and kind of left Mormonism was the beauty and mystery, which mystery wasn't very beautiful for me when I was growing up. So
mystery and beauty, those are the pillars.
Well, I think those are, I think that those would be ways, maybe adjectives. I'm not sure I would say that those are the pillars. I'd say it's whatever is. I guess it's what I said to the people in the meeting there when my cinematographer, who was not allowed in, had to shoot through the little. Thank heavens for his. He
made it work.
Yeah, well, he did. He really did make it work. And then the way that you heard it is that the sound guy came and sat inside and just inconspicuously had a microphone. So I would say it's that. It's just the way people treat other people. I would say kindness and love and respect for other people. Yeah. I'd say that's the pillar of my faith.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can go with that. You said a really interesting thing at the end of the movie. You said 5 years ago, I would have ended this movie differently. In 5 years, I would end it differently again. And I'm curious, how would it have ended 5 years ago?
Probably would have been a little edgier at the end, a little sharper, and maybe the structure. But I mean, you mentioned that I was kind. You didn't use that word, but I was kind to my younger self. But also, I took the Guatemalans very seriously. That was a really important thing for me in this film, was to make sure that every person and the church as well, and every person's beliefs were taken seriously. There were a lot of things I pruned out. I didn't want it to have anything that felt as though I was trying to diminish someone else's experience or beliefs, and it also really wasn't for me a statement about Mormonism. It was a story I wanted to tell, and let that be sort of by implication what I stood for. And so 5 years ago, I think, well, I mean, it's hard to answer that, but in some ways that question that came to me late in the game, and there were many years when I believed pretty firmly I would never finish this film.
Oh.
Well, it took me 13 years.
Yeah. And I was noticing that technology. I was like, that's an old MacBook.
It's, I couldn't finish it until I felt like I could let go of it and feel and believe that what I had said was a genuinely honest thing from me, and feel good about it. It took me a really long time to get to that. Because I know it's out there in the world forever, and people can look at it and say, well, look what you said here, look what you said here, and then I'm okay with it. I can live with everything I said. So even though I said if I finished it 5 years ago, I would have ended it differently, the truth is I couldn't finish it 5 years ago, or I would have, but I didn't.
Very good.
I mean, I finished it when I could. That's when it was done is when I could let it go. Yeah.
And so finishing it, it sounds like you have two ways of approaching what it meant to finish it, and one was that you let go of shame, and you also let go of the movie. You let go of the experience.
Well, I let go of the movie for sure.
You let go of the movie.
Letting go of shame, I don't know that that's a process that will ever fully end, but certainly I've let go of a lot of it. Yeah.
Was there a particular piece of shame that that especially got let go of?
I guess I would say that the maybe simple way of putting it would be, or a shorthand way of putting it would be, when I was a missionary and when I grew up in the church, doubt and questioning of a certain kind was an antagonist in this story, and it became more of a heroic figure. So I no longer felt that kind of critical thinking and questioning and doubting was problematic, but rather that it was actually kind of the point. So for me, and I think people want to live their lives differently. We all want a certain kind of certainty. Anyone who says otherwise, I don't think is being honest. And we all want, we want some kind of stability, but for me, that stability's got to allow for a lot of wide-ranging questioning and challenging and doubting. But ultimately, I mean, I think you know my dad. I think every member of my family, there's a certain thing we have in common, which is I think we're all basically pretty optimistic people. And even though many of us in our family have struggled a lot, much like I'm talking about here, and you saw in the film, but there's no cynicism. And I never wanted to sort of adopt that position, because that seems kind of like a surrender, and so that doesn't work for me. So finding a way to be optimistic about things, but also to sort of countenance the doubts and the questions and the things that I see and don't like has been kind of a hard process.
I'd say so. Getting back to Gene England, one of his favorite quotes was Joseph Smith's about you find truth by proving contraries. By proving contraries is truth made manifest. Mm-hmm. And from my experience with him, what he meant by truth isn't that you find out what's right or what's wrong, but that you expand and you become larger because you've been in this difficult place between the two poles that are both pulling at you. And I felt that in your movie. I felt you staying in that tension. It could have been a much more easily solved problem. We could have thought that any of the people were antagonists and couldn't be brought to the light. But instead, everybody got to have their humanity, and we felt what it was like to be stretched on the particular questions and relationships that you had. So I'm actually kind of grateful for that 15 years, because it probably deepened both you and the film a lot. And what you put out, I think, is really worth watching. And actually, I would encourage you to go to the Whova app under your session and look at the Q&A. There's a lot of really nice things there that people are saying about you, just in case you need a pick-me-up.
Well, we all need that, don't we?
Absolutely. Geoff, thanks so much for joining me for this Q&A. Our time is up, and it seems to have gone rather quickly, but thank you for putting this out into the world. It's a gift I wasn't expecting to receive, that came out of a place that I didn't even know it was going to happen. This is a great gift, and I really appreciate you putting all the work into making this happen.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's going to be out in Filmocracy and on Amazon Prime, I think, next week. So tell your friends. I'm trying to get people to watch it. That's what matters to me, is for people to look at it. So spread the word, please. And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to show it here at Sunstone. I'm grateful to you. Thanks.
All right. Good luck on all your future endeavors, and we'll catch you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.